There are numerous types of critical or literary theories, but in today's video, I'll be focusing on the feminist critical perspective, or in other words, the feminist literary theory. By general definition, feminism is a philosophy in which women and their contributions are valued. It is based on social, political, and economic equality for women. Feminist theory is an extension of feminism into theoretical, fictional, and philosophical discourse. It aims to understand the nature of gender inequality. To build onto that, feminist literary theory is informed by feminist theory, or more broadly, by the politics of feminism. It uses the principles and ideology of feminism to critique the language of literature. It seeks to analyze and describe the ways in which literature portrays the narrative of male domination by exploring the economic, social, political, and psychological forces embedded within the literature. Returning to feminism, a feminist can be anyone in the population, men, women, girls, or boys. Feminism can also be described as a movement or revolution that includes women and men who wish the world to be equal with discrimination based on gender and that the idea that men are superior to women abolished. Women have always struggled to gain equality, respect, and the same rights as men. This has been difficult because of patriarchy, an ideology in which men are superior to women and have the right to rule women. Many would argue that there is no need for feminists anymore because, through the years of petitioning and demanding, women are now equal to men. However, this assumption is false and is proven false in the form of 4 central tenets of feminist criticism. Although the fight for women having equal opportunities as men have succeeded in the past 100 years, women are still not equal. These tenets are evidence that feminist criticism is still relevant, and fighting for equal opportunities is not over yet. Number 1. The Western civilization is patriarchal, meaning ruled by the father, male-centered and controlled. Some ways to subordinate women to men in all cultural domains are familial, religious, political, economic, social, legal, and artistic. Men are stereotypically referred to as the strong money-getters in a family, while women are the weak caregivers. Another fact is that Canada has only had one female Prime Minister, Kim Campbell, and she was only in this position for 148 days until a man had been re-elected. Lastly, 6BuzzTV is an account on Instagram with over 1 million followers who rule young, impressionable people in the Greater Toronto Area. This account is known in any Canadian high school and is essentially one of the primary news sources for all Canadian youth/young adult. The account is entirely male-dominated and constantly bashes on girls and categorizing all women with appalling and misbehaved women as shown in these posts. Girls on this account are referred to as tings, batteries, hoes, and even bitches. Number 2. Prevailing concepts of gender, traits that constitute what male and feminine is, are entirely cultural constructs that were generated by omnipresent patriarchal biases of our civilization. If we look at the chart of top 7 male and female characteristics, most of these characteristics accurately portray what we see in the media. Although we can identify anima and animus traits in most beings, the fact that these stereotypes still exist is problematic. Some women are not content with being labeled characteristics, and some men are not content with being labeled characteristics either. Number 3. The patriarchal, masculinist ideology pervades those writings which have been considered as great literature, and when until recently have been written by men, for men. How one portrays themselves or others of a similar gender in their own literature is completely biased based on the author's life story. For example, in a book that you guys will soon read, F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, the character Jay Gatsby is inspired by the author himself. Gatsby is seen as a loyal, smart, and determined person, primarily not a character to dislike. As we will learn in a class, Fitzgerald had a high perception of himself, and the only reason he was able to write the book in the first place was that he experienced different social classes in his own life. We also learned that Zelda, similar to Daisy, refused to marry Fitzgerald until he could prove a steady income. The way women and men were portrayed in this novel was in the male's perspective of how gender roles appear in his eyes, and thus a novel written by men for men. Number 4. The traditional aesthetic categories and criteria for analyzing and appraising literary works are in fact infused with masculine assumptions, interests, and ways of reasoning, so that the standard rankings and also the critical treatments of literacy works have in fact been tactfully but thoroughly gender-based. Okay, if I ask you to picture an entrepreneur, superhero, or a basketball player, who does your mind first think of? If the person you first thought of was a boy, or a man, and it probably was, this is because we are infused with masculine assumptions. Now think of a ballerina, nail technician, or someone with long hair. Who does your mind first think of? If the person you first thought of was a girl or a woman, and again, it probably was, this is because we are infused with feminine assumptions as well. However, masculine assumptions and reasonings heavily outweigh feminine assumptions because good role models and people of power tend to be male. We are led to assume that God is male, even though God has no assigned gender, and we are also quick to assume that political leaders and heroes and male are male. This is just how society programs us to think, with masculine pre-assumptions. Now that you are aware of the 4 central tenets of feminist criticism, I want you to come to terms with all the other examples of females living under the male's oppression. Here are some staggering statistics from Girl Rising. This is the reality that so many girls around the world have to face. These statistics are scary to hear, but it shows that the job of feminists is not over yet. Going back to literature, the next time you are required to analyze work from a feminist perspective, here are a few questions to ask yourself. 1. How are the relations between men and women or between numbers of the same sex presented in the work? 2. How are the male and female roles defined? 3. Does the author present work from within a predominantly male or female sensibility? Why might this have been done, and with what effects? 4. How do the facts of the author's life relate to the presentation of men and women in the work, to relative degree of power? Thank you for listening.